Just waiting to go live stream. We're live now, so anything you say will be recorded and broadcast. So again, welcome to the meeting of the Regulatory Committee, and I'll just call for apologies. I haven't received any.
Yeah, Councillor Ludlow.
Well, she's not a member of the committee.
Oh no, sorry, I got the wrong committee.
Yeah. Councillor Gibson is, though. Have we heard from him?
Oh, he'll be an apology because he's at an environment awards.
Yeah, he's in.
Oh, I don't know, they're judging that.
Okay, so we'll read an apology for Alistair.
Happy to move, Mr.
Chairman Hall. Seconded by. Thanks, Jeremy. Those in favour, please say aye.
Mr. Chairman, just for your information, Lacey Bragg has gone home unwell this morning, so I'll be speaking to her two items. For item 9.8 on the Mataura Water Conservation Order, my understanding is that Don Rule and Bianca Sullivan will be joining through Zoom to speak to that item.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest for this agenda for this meeting? And if not, public forums, petitions and deputations. No members of the public present. I haven't been notified of anything. The last meeting was on the 9th of May, and we've got the minutes that are attached to the agenda, and that's there for confirmation.
Happy to move.
Mr. Chairman, there's a spelling error on under 9.4. The word Mataura.
It is too. We can rely on you. So I was reading somewhere the other day on stuff that somebody had their glod stolen. I just couldn't figure out what it was. Their glod.
What?
And it was repeated right through the article. It was their gold. All right. Are there any matters arising? Any questions for the? I think it's been moved by Jeremy that it's a correct record. Seconded by Chairman Hall. Any further discussion? If not, put the motion. Those in favour, please say aye. Any against? Carried. Notification of extraordinary and urgent business. None that I have been notified of. Questions? Councillor McDonald has a question.
Yep.
Councillor McDonald.
Yes, put a question on there. So I think it's pretty understandable, but I'll just go over for it if you'd like, Mr. Chairman. Just the context of supporting good management practices around intensive winter grazing. It is a key focus for this council. It does carry quite a large reputational risk to this council and the activities. When things go well, we don't really hear too much. When things go wrong, it becomes on the television, doesn't it? And that's the way it goes. So I'm just really conscious that there is, as I understand, an internal working group around intensive winter grazing. And is there still an external one? I just want to get my head around as a committee member. Do we have a way of planning going into next season, and what are the dates that we hit? Or I just felt as though going into this year there wasn't much communication until we got into May, and I felt that was leaving things a wee bit late. So look, just a general comment on that, the need for some planning.
So, Bruce, are you going to answer that? Or
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start and then also ask Donna to add some commentary. You're really timely and pertinent question. Obviously, intensive winter grazing is a high-profile activity, and in some instances can be a high-risk activity. I think we've talked before about the fact that generally practice is improving across the region, but certainly I think there's some opportunity for improvement for the 24-25 season to be more proactive and timely in our communication, and in particular getting some clear communication out prior to the cultivation season. So, not leaving it till post-Christmas. Getting proactively communicating probably early to mid-September if we can. So having a workshop with yourselves is a very timely suggestion, which we're more than comfortable to pick up and run with. And Donna's already done some proactive planning around that, but certainly we're keen to make sure that the messaging is clear, and it goes out in a timely manner well before the commencement of the cultivation season. So I'll hand over to Donna to add a little bit more commentary around that.
Through you, Chair. So intensive winter grazing is a year-round program regardless of which part of the season we're in, and there is an
Could you speak up just a wee bit, please, Donna?
Sorry, there is an internal working group that work all year round on having that there. At the end of the regulatory phase, which we're coming towards, there's a review period, which we sit down and we work on what went well, what didn't. We build that into next year's plan. Next year's plan is then locked in, and we start to work on that. So that's the basis of the workshop we're pulling together now to let councillors know what we do, when we do it, and why what we do.
That's really good. I'm really happy to hear that, and it might be really good too to bring some councillors, some farmer councillors like Councillor Pemberton, maybe McPhail, people that are on the ground doing this sort of practice, and to bring them into that loop of maybe that internal group. It's just an idea that could come out of the back of the workshop. Pleased to hear that.
Thanks, councillor. That is a very important issue for council that we get it right. And we've managed to get it more right in the last
We've been doing good.
season than we have in some previous ones. But
It's supporting the people. That's what we're doing, and we're doing a really good job
it
of
has
it.
a severe impact on the reputation of the council and its ability to do its business if we don't get compliance. Councillor Dyson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to that, Chairman Hall may be aware of this, but I certainly am. Over the last few days, there's been a journalist from the New Zealand Listener in the Southern region very interested in that issue in particular and associated issues. And she has been visiting people all around the region, including myself, just so that you know. Though she didn't do an official interview, I didn't, but I referred her to Chairman Horrell. I don't know if you've heard from her, but
Not at this stage, no.
and she was being hosted by the group New Zealand Rivers, I believe they're called. I'm sure you know those guys. But she was a very open-minded person, I felt, but there may be something coming up in the listening with regard to that.
Thank you. Councillor McPhail.
Can I just clarify, is that around winter grazing? Was it?
Yes, particularly, but not exclusively.
Just, in regards to the workshop, obviously the season starts in September, but it'll be crucial because the rules come into play for next winter about pasture wintering, and also slope degrees and all these things coming into play. So I don't know how we're going to do it, but it's not about the government's rules. These are actually our rules, and so we'll be critical to have these, just absolutely hammering away. I know comms, I always said that, I still wonder why we don't have a Alliance have brief bites each week. We've got an internet, an email goes out Friday afternoon. I don't know, that's I've asked why don't we have something like that? Beef and Lamb, Dairy NZ, for the industries all have these what's on, what's up. They're always going on about winter grazing and all that. I don't know why ES doesn't actually have one too. That's saying what's new and just hammering away. It comes up, whether you want to read it or not, at least people usually sign up to it. So subscribe to it and it'll be a great way. But no, definitely, they need to get their head around that these aren't government rules. They're going to be Southland rules. And the communities decide this is how we're going to deal with, say, winter grazing. So and certainly like to be involved. We're getting the word out there too.
Clarifying that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I agree with Councillor McDonald's question. So it is a very important thing. I note that the Riverton incident that made the national news this year, that the council didn't feel that was a problem as far as water quality is concerned, and that may be the case, but it's a very bad look for the region, for the dairy industry in general. So, and I don't know what happened in that situation, but that kind of thing really needs to be avoided. You need to be able to see what might lead up to that, and that could be part of Peter's question, what might lead up to a situation like that, to warn farmers to make sure they avoid that. That's a that would be a good learning out of that, I would think, because it is a reputational risk to this council, because everybody sees, oh, that's the regional council not doing their job, and also to the dairy industry in general.
The president of Federated Farmers had quite a bit to say about that on radio, that he wasn't blaming Environment Southland. It was an animal welfare issue MPI were involved in, and they were reported quite extensively.
Yeah, I understand.
So
that.
we can't push our nose in where
But it's a perception.
it's not one of our roles.
It's a perception issue from
Yeah,
the general
True,
about the practice.
but we shouldn't, we can't
No, I agree with
make
you.
public statements about things that belong to some other agency. That's our thing. So Jeremy, and then
I was just going to say that how much can we say about what involvement we've had in regards to that? Are we able to?
I think Donna was going to report a bit later on.
Okay, okay, no, that's fine. I just thought we need to maybe clarify what we did and what we didn't, or didn't have to, and things. So, anyway.
Jim Hall.
Yes, I think we probably need to be careful what we're saying in public, because another agency may be going through a process. So just a caution there. And Donna asked, after questions last week, she will give us a bit of an oversight of how we work with the MPI with these situations. But coming back to the education thing, we government are likely to rescind the order in council on the MPS for fresh water in the next few weeks. That will add to more confusion in some places. So just going from my mind at the moment is one, Jeremy's comments about sort of even weekly updates. If we could work with the old intensive winter grazing group, which includes all the industry good organisations, including ourselves, to put out some consistent messaging about our own plan will take precedence if that's the case. There are rules around winter grazing on grass that wasn't there under the old thing. But I think because there will be some confusion, I think we do have to have probably an ongoing campaign, just because you think people should know it. But I'm worried that some people think there's no rules, and there's always rules, and their own plan, which has some sensible rules, and it will take precedence.
Thank you. Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, look, thanks very much for entertaining the question. You can tell by some of the commentary, it is a big deal. But I like the word that you used, Nicole, the word campaign. It goes along with what Jeremy was saying, some sort of sustained campaign. But maybe we could talk about this with a plan workshop you indicated, Donna, so that would be really good. Thanks.
Thank you for
Mr.
raising the
Chairman.
matter, Councillor McDonald. Awesome discussion. So we move on to Chairman and Councillors' reports. I do not have an independent report. Does anybody else have anything? Right, we'll move on from that to item 9.1, which is the biosecurity regulatory report for the quarter 4, June 24. That's on page 12 of your agenda. And that's Ellie Means. Hello, Ellie.
Good afternoon. So through you, Chair, I'll take the paper as read. It's been a pretty quiet quarter in terms of regulation in the biosecurity space. The only things a little bit out of normal are we actually did our first notice of inspection for animal pests for the first time in probably, I don't know how many years, and that was when we were looking for rooks. But other than that, it's been an incredibly quiet quarter.
Did we confirm that it was a rock?
We have not been able to find any rooks, no. Happy to answer any questions you may have on them.
Just to clarify, this is the same report?
Oh, sorry.
Is this the same?
Operations.
Sorry, so the operational
It's the
bit
operational.
of the attachment was
Okay.
covered in regional services. Sorry, that wasn't
Yeah.
supposed to be attached to this report. So the report for this is the first couple of pages around the Biosecurity Act regulation we've done. So the exemptions, the inspections, sorry, yeah, and the attachment shouldn't be there. Apologies.
Good.
So you dealt with the rabbit
Yes.
reduction in numbers. Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I ask about the rook reports? People, somebody has phoned or contacted you and they've said they've seen something,
Yep.
something black flapping in the sky. How specific? I'm trying to work out how valid those reports sound has weighed against, you couldn't find them? Like, do you think there were some, but you just couldn't find them?
Some of them were from South City and Invercargill, and pictures came back and they were very definitely shags. So some of them,
Okay.
no. The most likely one was up around Five Rivers, where it was a report of 3 birds in a paddock that looked very similar to rooks, and they were very black. The team did a lot of work up there and spoke to a lot of landowners, and we think it was magpies just facing the wrong way in the shadows and then looking like a rook. But it is we take everything seriously and then try and work out how credible it is as we go through.
So I'm guessing you didn't go to South Invercargill to have a look.
We did before we got the photo. So the first time we're told, so we had it a couple of times. The first time we did, and we, it's in history, and we went and had a bit of a look. But when we got photos, like, no, that's definitely a corner or a shag.
Chairman Hall?
Yes, just on the rook thing, what's the behaviour? I had quite a medium-sized black bird when I thought, is this a rook? But it disappeared before I could actually see it, but it was diving down quite low and going up quite steeply. But by the time I got my camera out, it had disappeared. I haven't seen it again since, but it was not a bird I've seen before. It was pure black, bigger than a magpie or something like that. And I just, the question mark was,
There's a really good video on our website that you can look, but maybe, Councillor, if I get Dave to come and talk to you separately outside of this meeting, and we can have a good conversation with you around.
Rookbusters?
yeah.
That's us. We're the Rookbusters.
I was hoping to get photographic evidence that I could say, is this a rook? No, coming
I
flew
don't
behind the horse.
know. I don't want to.
So, I used to live in Usman and travel down to Napier quite a bit, and there's a mob of them live just north of Napier. And they're very obvious. They're certainly a lot larger than magpies. And their behaviour is similar, but not the same. No, they're really obvious. Yeah, they're a big bird. So we hope we don't get any down here.
Very much so.
Not impossible, but so that was the activity report. You've got your operations plan. Did you want to talk about that, Ellen?
No, so sorry. So that was supposed to be attached to the Regional Services Committee, not this agenda. So apologies for that one. That was. I'm happy to answer questions on that as well, but it was a mistake.
Okay. Thank you. Just feel we've been left out. So what's the next item?
I'll second it.
Page 33. The regulatory framework update with Bruce Halligan.
Remove that.
I'm sorry. We
Morris
received
moved.
the
I'm second that.
biosecurity report, seconded by,
Jeremy?
Yeah, Morris moved it.
I apologise.
Sorry.
Well, it was a bit mumbly at the time, so.
It's all right.
I seconded it.
I was probably distracted, but thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you, Ellie. Right, the regulatory framework update.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The focus of the regulatory framework is really on continuous improvement across the regulatory area of Environment Southland, which takes in not only the biosecurity, biodiversity functions, which Ellie's just talked about, but obviously the resource management / compliance team, consents, and also our harbour master functions. This is just really an update report on some of the key focus areas in the last quarter. First one I'll take the report as read, but highlight the enforcement recommendations panel. That panel has been meeting quite regularly in the last quarter to consider a range of issues. And we have 2 more meetings this week, for example, to look at a couple of particular issues that have come to the panel's attention. Some of you appreciate your attendance at the muffin talk that we did on this on the 3rd of July, which was really well attended by staff. It was basically trying to raise awareness around the panel and opportunities to utilise that panel type approach, and really appreciated the councillor's presence that was there. It was great to have that. So if you're interested, we could run that again at some future stage. For those of you that weren't present, there's no problems with doing that.
That was very well presented.
Second item I'll highlight is we've created a new monthly regulatory alignment meeting. A couple of instances that we've had have highlighted some issues around some disconnect between the different parts of our organisation that perform regulatory functions. So we're trying to to use this new alignment meeting on a monthly basis to highlight topical issues and whether there are areas where we can improve the connection between the teams. Generally speaking, things are working well, but in some instances, there's been a bit of a breakdown in communications around who's the owner of a particular issue, where some correspondence or communication might traverse several different regulatory functions. So we're looking at ways to address that, and also using the power of the regulatory team to support mentoring and growth in the team itself. Touch wood, at the moment, the teams are pretty stable and functioning well, and there's some really good development happening across, particularly newer staff who are really getting up to speed really well. And that's a credit to those managers for managing those areas, but we certainly don't want to take that for granted. So creating this alignment meeting also provides an opportunity for the team leaders and the team to sort of step up a bit to more of a managerial type focus. So that's, I think, a positive initiative in that respect. We've had quite a bit of input across the regulatory teams into some of the work that's been happening through the policy and government area. As you know, there's been a raft of legislative reform proposed, and there's been regular opportunities to input into our submissions, etc., that have been put forward to that national forum. And kudos to Lucy and others who've represented, and the chairman, obviously. I do watch all those live streams and things of our presentations to select committees and things, and I think it's really good that we are in that space and presenting the Southland regional view, which is really important. Secondly, really good to see the level of connection and consistency with other like councils, for instance, around coastal areas where there's, like Marlborough has had a lot of involvement for a long period of time. We can learn off them and make sure that we're sending consistent messaging through to a central government level. It's obviously quite confusing if you get messaging from 16 different regions and sometimes up to 80 different councils saying 80 different things. So having that alignment and connection has been really good. Moving on to the mentoring area, that's a really focus across the regulatory area. Experienced regulatory people are pretty hard to find, and so it is a bit of a case of grow your own, and the managers in the group are doing a really good job of that, but it's an ongoing focus area, and need to respect the autonomy of the managers to manage their own teams, but there's certainly cross-department learnings, and we have people like sort of Graham McKenzie and others in the team who've been 40 years experience who trying to make the use of that experience to help the newer members of the team, and it's really positive to see people so willing to do that. So that's been really positive. But certainly we can look at how some other councils are doing mentoring. Some of the bigger councils, such as ECAN, have a very structured approach to that, and they will onboard a dozen people at a time. They've got a much bigger organisation, but they run them through a very structured program of technical competency to reach a certain level, and then they move up to the next level, etc. So we may not necessarily have the resources to directly replicate that, but we can take some learnings out of that type of approach. And the final item I wanted to mention was the delegations register review. We have a current delegation register which is online, so anyone can look at it. There's been some recent case law which has highlighted concerns around how delegations are exercised by council, particularly the ability to sub-delegate. So that's led to some focus around how we're managing our delegations and the way we're expressing those delegations. And that's quite crucial, really, because of if there's a high level of legal scrutiny, our delegation to a certain person to perform a certain role has to be able to withstand that. So there's a strong focus on that, and that will be brought back to yourselves in due course as a proposed new delegations register for your consideration.
Just on that last item, can I ask, is there any obvious changes that we need to think about now? We have delegated over time, and Morris will remember quite a number of matters which used to be dealt with at this committee level, back to the managers.
Yes. Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's a good comment. The pendulum has swung somewhat across councils both around the country, where there's a lot more delegation to staff, and now it's probably swung back a little bit the other way following some of this case law. We have some instances around national processes like Fast Track, which didn't exist 5 years ago, where we have some delegation gaps there, and some of our more pointy end functions around decision to prosecute or to take the firmer end of enforcement action. We're just having a look at that quite closely to make sure it's suitably robust, because that's quite often where the rubber hits the road and where challenges can occur.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or commentary around that report? Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's a really good idea, this mentorship thing. So is that to achieve consistency across the wider group, or is it just around the passing knowledge on from one to the other, from experience to non-experience, or both of those functions?
Yeah, probably really both of those functions. I mean, it is confusing for external customers and consultants and things if you have a team performing a function and you have one person who sets the bar up here, another one sets the bar down here. So it is about trying to create a generally consistent approach across interpretation of key issues, and make sure that that approach is calibrated correctly. You've got to pick your battles in the regulatory space, and sometimes there's other ways to skin the cat other than having a battle, if you know what I mean. So making sure that the approach is consistent with our enforcement policy and compliance policies, and is proportional to the issue that's being dealt with, really.
Yeah. Oh, no, I support that. I think it's really an important area where it's, you're right on the edge of handing out, well, not handing out, but delving out natural resource, and it's where the rubber meets the road, really, isn't it? People.
Thank you. Councillor Guyton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering, how is the algorithm that determines where serious action is taken that you mentioned? And is there a place in there for governance at all nowadays?
Yes, a couple of really good questions. In our policy, our policies outline a range of approaches, and education is usually the starting point, and escalating through to at the pointy end of things, formal prosecution. So, and I think kudos to Donna and her team. I think they're setting that bar at a really good level at the moment, and calibrated at a good level, and that's been reflected, I think, in the feedback from customers that is coming through, as well as that they feel like they're being treated reasonably and fairly, and that's, I think, where you want to try and land. Quite often there are some judgment calls in that, so it's not like a 1 + 1 = 2 type decision making. And the other part of that is probably focusing on that, what's the best way to get to the outcome that you're looking for. And sometimes there's good reasons for a prosecution, both in terms of that individual and maybe the broader messaging that it sends. But in other instances, you can get to that same outcome in a less adversarial way. So we are driven by our policy framework, and that's important, because we don't want to have responses that vary depending on how the particular officer might be feeling on the day. It needs to be transparent. People need to be able to look at a reasonable outcome, and it can withstand the level of scrutiny that it quite often gets at a legal perspective.
So thank you. That said, is there a point where staff will decide we need to put this in front of governance before we make a definitive decision?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, generally the Auditor General and others have recommended against councillors being involved in individual decisions around prosecution. The prosecution delegation currently sits with the Chief Executive, so no other staff other than the Chief Executive can decide to take a prosecution action.
It's not, maybe I wasn't very clear. I didn't mean the decision making going to the council. I mean just in terms of awareness, because there are wider issues such as Councillor Rodway was talking about perception.
That's right.
Public perception and so on.
There certainly is, and it's coming up actually, we're talking about this morning. We regularly review our policies around this, and that's really a key governance opportunity, is to look at our current policies and see whether they meet your contemporary expectations as representatives of the community. And probably the key opportunity to feed is in that policy development space. As far as individual decisions as to whether to prosecute or not prosecute, we'd normally be in more of an informing situation.
All right, thank you, that's good.
There was a time when things like that used to
Yeah,
come to
I
council,
remember.
but it's quite inappropriate for council to be aware of a pending prosecution before the person the company that's being prosecuted becomes aware of it. So, you know, we might have a desire to know about things and have knowledge about them, but it's not appropriate or reasonable actually to have that to council before it goes out to the public.
True. I remember the particular incident you might be thinking of yourself.
Yeah, councillor.
Yes, well, you know, back in the past, we did have more of an oversight, and I thought the way we did it actually added another string to the bow. We didn't know, we supported staff. Almost, to Robert's question, have we gone too far? We have our oversight now is the after the fact thing, is that so there was a prosecution and we're sort of informed. Have a halfway house, there are difficulties with, as Neville's pointed out, with prosecution going on. We're probably about right, but reviews of these things are always good, and it has changed over the years, and we are specifically by the Director General instructed that governance should not have any role in that prosecution process. So our only role really is an oversight as to whether the system's working well and whether there needs to be any tweaks as far as I'm concerned going forward.
Thank you. And attached to the report, the operational report, is the operational regulatory framework.
Just to refresh your memory, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
with some graphics there on pages 58 and 59, just giving you an broad oversight of how things work, the process. Are there any questions or commentary following those reports? The recommendation is that we receive the report regulatory framework update.
Happy to move, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Hoff, thank you. Seconded by Chairman McDonald. If there's any further discussion, put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Engaged? Carried. We move on to item 9.3, which is on page 70. Consents Division report. Which is Lacey Bragg is off ill, so it's Bruce.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, unfortunately Lacey came in this morning but went home looking and feeling very unwell. So I'll present this on her behalf and just take the report itself as read. I'll just highlight a few, maybe give you a few updates as I move through. Bottom of page 70, we talk about the 38 marine coastal permits in Big Glory that are due to expire. What's happened since the writing of this report is there has been applications lodged in a group for those marine farms in the Big Glory area, so they're in the system for processing at the moment. There's some holding action there at the moment due to, I'm sure you're aware, there's been the dialogue at the national level around extending the duration of all these aquaculture consents, so the applicants are just in a bit of a holding pattern for that at the moment.
Can I just ask, where are we with that? Because I was assumed that it was almost a given that it was going to happen. Or listening to the minister.
Yeah, through Mr. Chairman, the Select Committee has reported back with no major changes from what's been originally proposed. They've made some amendments around some of our abilities to review coastal permits, although the cost recovery elements of that probably make that reasonably unattractive. But yeah, it looks like that change will occur, and although it's yet to be formally finalised as yet.
So that would directly affect the Big Glory Bay.
Could well do. So that's why they sort of put them in a bit of a holding while that's progressing through the system.
Thank you.
Moving on, I'll just highlight at the top of page 71 the Contact Energy application to the EPA. And obviously, thank you for your inputs to the recent workshop. Feedback on that, the comment was sent through to the EPA on the 24th of July, which was the day before comments closed. Since then, the comments have closed. There's a large range of very extensive comments. So they're all viewable on the EPA website. The applicant, following close of comments, requested the panel to suspend the processing of the application, and that happened on the 30th of July. While the applicant worked through a number of issues. So at the moment, the application is suspended in the media at the weekend, Contact seemed to signal intention to continue to proceed with the proposal. They're undertaking some further engagement with Mana Whenua at the moment. So at the moment, the application is on hold. It is interesting, if you haven't already looked at it, I can certainly send you the link to look at the range of comments and the extent of comments. So there was a lot of commentary from a range of both local people and national agencies and other councils. And our comment did get some media coverage as well, which I think I've circulated to through the Chief Executive's weekly update. But again, I can send that if you haven't seen it. Moving on, further down page 71, we mentioned that Ngāi Tahu Seafood, Hananui Aquaculture, and the appeal of the EPA panel decision to the High Court, which was intended to occur in April this year, but has been rescheduled to October 2024. We've had no further legal update on that. So at this point in time, ourselves and solicitors Wynne Williams are awaiting any further action on that. As I'm sure you're aware, when things get to the High Court, it's primarily a matter, it's a legal interpretation matter as opposed to a substantive matter. So we're awaiting any further feedback from the court as to where that's heading. Just probably highlighting more generally, the team has had a new consents officer, Isabel Ginsberger, who started 2 weeks ago, which brings the consents team up to a full complement, which is really good. And the team's been doing really well on the timeframe side of things, with running to 100% timeframe compliance. So, just take any further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, Morris.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the top of page 71, talk about the municipal township wastewater consent and a number of them coming up for renewal. 2 questions. Can you be more specific about the number, and do these have to now, because of national policy statements or the water plan, discharge to land rather than to water?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, we've got, I think, 18 that would need to be renewed in the next 5 years. There's 2 in the system at the moment for smaller scale Southern District Council schemes. They're seeking effectively bridging type consents for continuing discharge to water with some further treatment for short term. As has been reported, the dynamics of moving from discharge to water to discharge to land are no mean feat, quite challenging for the territorial authorities. So the framework as it exists at the moment doesn't automatically mean that there must be a discharge to land, but sets a high bar for ongoing discharge to water. So it's not an absolute no-go, but it's certainly a high bar to continue that type of discharge to water.
Yeah. Thank you.
Are there any echoes of the Clutha District Mayor's public statements, again, I think again in the paper today, that it's impossible for local bodies to actually meet the standards? Are we having any of our councils saying words to that effect? Financially?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, not that I'm aware of, but looking at like a local context, say around the move from Te Anau wastewater system, from a system that discharged with some treatment into the Pakarora catchment and then into the lake, to a land-based system which now discharges between Te Anau and Manapori, about 5 k's north of Manapori on the inland side of the state highway. You know, that was a lengthy and costly and fairly adversarial process to get to ultimately a really good environmental improvement, but it certainly wasn't easy. So I guess those are the sorts of situations that some of the mayors are highlighting, and if you extrapolate that to a much bigger scheme where you might need significantly more land to enable land-based discharge, etc., it's a challenging situation for the territorials.
Thank you. Chairman Hall?
Well, I've got 2 or 3 issues. The first one is the coastal plan change, where we have to wait for the Minister of Conservation to actually sign it off. Previous experience means sometimes that can take quite some time. Do we have any avenues to encourage the hurry up in that situation or not?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I might ask if Lucy's got any comments on that. was speaking to some dock staff this morning about it, but you might have some better intel than me.
Thank you, through Chair. Yes is the answer. We're making approaches to the Minister's office directly through the officials that we've been lodging the paperwork with. They had a chivvy up last week. We followed up with them to see where it was at. And at that point, they said it's on the Minister's desk in his stack, so it should be not too far away. 40 working days was what we've been told. So we'll see hopefully soon. But I can provide more of an update as
Thank you. Chairman,
What else did we have? Well, just on that last discussion, the other fly in the ointment, I guess, is that the Ellen Pregnant Group have been tasked by government to look at wastewater discharges to try and get more continuity, etc. They appear to be looking at a population-based scale on a risk-based then we've got to wait to see what comes out, but there was talk about that under 1,000 people may have a slightly easier or less expensive pathway, but none of that's known. So that actually adds to the consternation for territorials at the moment. But at the moment, there's 25% nationwide are actually on expired consents. I think 70% come up in the next 10 years. So this is going to be an ongoing issue. And until we get a wee bit of clarity, it's going to be awkward from a regional council point of view. I'm concerned that if we're more lenient, the problems in the waterways everybody won't be contributing at the same level. So these are complex decisions that we'll have to work on going forward. And obviously, people can't do something overnight, and that's the same as we're saying to the farming community. But there needs to be a clear goal, and I guess that's not quite there at the moment. There's some it's quite sensible, I think, to try and come up with a structure that this is the sort of waste system you need, so you can get procurement efficiencies and a whole lot of other things going forward. But at sea at the moment, with the conversations with the mayoral forums across Otago South, and there are different views on where this is all going to land at the moment. And the third point, I think it was, no, I'll leave it in the meantime.
okay, I've got Jeremy, Peter and Robert in that order.
Yeah, going back to the discussion over the border at the moment in regards to discharge to land, a question that's just coming up is, and they're all talking about the cost. The actual land's not the expensive part. Like, I'm just trying to understand is they're looking, the costs are actually probably in the town, the pipes under the town to fix up. They're probably a lot of the problem. Then there'll be the treatment plant. But the actual land aspect's not huge for some of these towns. I've heard Balclutha might only need 10 hectares of land to discharge. So, and I'm pretty sure it's not huge areas, but and there's a lot of confusion going on. The cost to land's expensive, but there's actually things that they're going to have to do if they're going to discharge to the water to rivers. So, and obviously it seems interesting that the feds seem to be telling them the towns can't afford to do this, when a number of years ago they were saying, well, we've got to sort the towns out first before you sort us out. Now they're saying, oh, don't touch the towns. So it's one of those things that the farmers aren't allowed to discharge to rivers and creeks with the effluent discharges, and we have rules around that. This is going to happen in town too, but it's appropriate that the rules apply to them too. So interesting discussion, but it's interesting that some of these costs, that's too expensive. It'll have to be done anyway, wherever you want to discharge it. It's actually maybe a lot of the pipe work under these towns are heavily degraded. So I'm just making a statement more than a question, but it's an interesting discussion what's happening over there.
Thanks, Jeremy. Peter.
Yeah, look, I support this discussion, and it's going to be even more of a bigger discussion going forwards. We've got our own things, regulatory functions that we have to undertake. Absolutely sure of that. Is there a way of having some sort of strategy around a transition with the territorials that understanding too is that their ratepayers are our ratepayers too. And we have to have a welfare consideration for them, but determined in the work that we have to undertake too, but some sort of pathway that we can map out with the territorials into the future. And it's along the same lines as Nicole and Jeremy's discussion there. I think it would be really important to start to think about what that could be.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, it's not unreasonable that the territorials are to some extent looking to take a bridging type approach, bearing in mind this uncertainty that's out there. You know, like if everyone knew where the bar was and there was some of the work that the chairman talked about was more in black and white and clearer, then that would make it easier for people to plan around. But it's understandable that the territorials are struggling to know where to go with some of the stuff with shifting sands of where the bar is moving forward and investing significant community funding into something when they don't exactly know where the target is. Yeah, so I think we certainly need to keep that dialogue going and probably not only look at it from the point of view of what the plan and the legislation says, but a little bit of pragmatism and the full wellbeing side of it as well.
Councillor Crichton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, no, it is interesting discussion. Discussion that should have taken place many, many years ago. And when I first came onto the council, the same problems were already apparent. But so it's good to see that we are a certain way further forward, bearing in mind iwi's role in this and their worldview, and also our responsibilities to the environment, not just to the community in terms of economic thinking. But what I'm wondering is, one of the encouraging things that are happening at the moment is the slow the flow way of thinking about water management. This is what this topic needs. It needs a slow the flow kind of approach, broader, bringing in these other kinds of ways of thinking about wastewater management. And so my question is there such a thing? Is there something on the horizon where people are thinking about this differently, not just in the way of pipes and disposal, but just the whole concept of what we've established and where we need to get to as the population grows and so on. I just wonder, is there such a thing? It'll have a catchy title, Slow the Flow. Or
There are things called like the New Zealand Land Treatment Collective, which is a group of people that looks at the innovations in this space. And, you know, as you say, there's been significant changes from, you know, maybe 30 or 40 years ago when your municipal wastewater went into an oxidation pond and got some level of treatment and then discharged out a pipe into the nearest ocean creek. There have been a number of instances, both nationally and worldwide, of significant improvements on that through constructed wetlands and all sorts of other treatment systems and membrane bioreactor plants and things like that, which is a small example of down at Curio Bay, where there's, you've probably seen the system down there. That's a very small scale version of what some other bigger councils are doing with significant pre-treatment before the discharge occurs. So there's some good thinking happening. It's probably not consolidated into a particularly clear pathway, but if people want to go looking for good innovative technology for municipal wastewater discharge, there's certainly some examples out there, both nationally and worldwide.
Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It makes me smile because we did have a thing that Robert was asking for just a little while ago and was tossed out by the National Party. It was called Three Waters. And that would have enabled people to work together. And, you know, we know all that. But anyway, that's gone.
No political speeches.
What?
yeah, quite right.
The question I have a comment. It relates to the table on page 74 and 75, which lists the publicly limited notified applications coming up. And this is an excellent way, I just want to say this is an excellent way of presenting that information. The last meeting, or it might have been the meeting before, there was a bit more of a subjective comment about one of the applications, which I didn't think was appropriate. And I think the way this is set out is really good. So thank you for that.
Thanks for that comment, Morris. Just going back to the discussion, then, like, this is not a new problem. But I look at it in the broader scheme of things that New Zealand was developed over a relatively short period of time right across the country. Like, you know, you walk around Invercargill City and most of the buildings, some of which have been torn down now, were built between 1886 and 1925. And that's where the infrastructure went in as well, and everything's falling apart all at once. That's why we're having to deal with it all at once across the province. Michael?
I remembered what my third question was, Mr. Chairman. It's on the Contact Energy wind farm, and I've had responded to a couple of calls. I think I read at the weekend that these towers are going to be equivalent height of the TY tower. If that's correct, 55 of them, they're not insignificant structures, and you know, renewable energy gets a tick, but I can have some understanding for people who are going to see these on the horizon, which they consider to be an outstanding landscape, that I see it's been put on hold, so hopefully there's going to be some answers coming back, but this is no small undertaking.
Well, this council has made a submission in relation to that development after consultation with us. So we'll see if anybody actually listens.
I think they're about twice the size as the Kaiwera ones, if you would see them.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, there's up to 55 turbines, up to 220 metres high, so they're certainly, and the contact's been quite open about the nature and scale of the structures. I will send a link through to the comments that have been received, but certainly there's some strong comments from both locally from residents, but also from from other entities as well. Our comments didn't labour that point too significantly because we'd liaised with Southern District Council, and they've put together through Boffa School quite an extensive comment on the landscape aspects of it. So yeah, that's where things are sitting at the moment. We'll certainly keep you updated on progress on that.
Thank you, Bruce. Are there any other questions or commentary in relation to this report, which is the Consents Division report?
Happy to move.
Mr. Chairman. Second by Rob. Any other, no further discussion? I put the motion. Those in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? Thank you. Thanks, Bruce, for that. And the next item is the appointment of hearing commissioners on page 77.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, you've got to see my ugly face again on this one rather than Lacey, but there's two matters here that we're looking to appoint hearing commissioners on and obtain the committee's approval for that. First one is dealt with in the later report around the Mataura Water Conservation consent reviews, and Don Rule and Bianca Sullivan will speak to where that's at in a little bit more detail, but it's proposed that it's intended that hopefully this may well be able to be a on the papers type decision, depending on if all the parties are agreeable, but that's yet to be formally determined. It's proposed to appoint Alan Cubitt, who's a very experienced independent commissioner, to consider the reviews and probably consider them in bulk because they all interrelate to each other, as you'll hear shortly, to get to hopefully agreed allocation amongst the consent holders that will then bring the allocation within the confines of the Mataura Water Conservation Order. And as I'm sure you know, the underlying driver for that conservation order is to ensure that there's appropriate residual flows in the catchment for cultural and ecological reasons. So it's intended to appoint Mr. Cubitt for that role. The second item relates to a cost objection by Capel Grove Limited in relation to processing costs for a dairy consent that they were involved with. That decision was appealed. Consent was declined following a commissioner hearing. The decision was appealed and subsequently resolved through an Environment Court consent memorandum. So the applicant made some fairly significant changes to their proposal, which resulted in the resolution of that matter and the granting of the consents sought, albeit in a different form from what was originally proposed when the commissioners heard it. The applicant has objected to the costs. It's proposed to appoint Jane McDonald, who's an experienced commissioner. She's a lawyer in Queenstown, and she's acted on a number of these other matters in the past, both here and elsewhere. So got a lot of experience in this space of hearing cost objections. So the policy that you adopted some time ago delegates to the regulatory committee to make these decisions on appointments. So that's a recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
So any commentary or questions about that? Both of those are experienced commissioners.
Move the recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Morris.
Happy to
Seconded
second.
by Chairman Hall. It's Sir Alan Cubitt and Jane McDonald. All those in favour of that, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Carried, thank you. Resource Management Team report with Donna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take the report as read and just a few highlights before I open up for some questions. Sorry, I've written over page number, page 83. I've spoken about winter grazing, so it's about this time of year where the focus of the resource management team, along with the internal working group, changes towards looking forward as well as managing what's happening in the winter ahead of us. So we're working with the comms team where lots of good work has been done and around the messaging for the rule changes for 2025 and how we deliver that in a varied way to make sure that it meets all the different markets and targets out there for us. To date, we've logged 39 incidents related to grazing, 18 of which were referrals from the catchment integration team from the proactive roadside assessments. 14 of those have resulted in advice and education. 20 have resulted in no further action because we've determined no breaches when we've been to site, and 5 remain open, currently under investigation, or literally have come in the last day or so. Winter air quality runs, so the no broom season runs from the 1st of May through to the 31st of August. To date, for that period of time, we've received 38 calls of complaint regarding outdoor burning and 8 regarding domestic chimneys, which we've responded to. We've got a 25% non-compliance rate on those at the moment, and so we're responding to those. High rate water takes. This is one of the periods of time of the year where we assess the high rate water take consents. We've got 105 of the 142 which are quoted in the report are fully compliant, which is a 60% fully compliant rate for those. Synthetic nitrogen, so the due date has just rolled over. We're waiting for the next couple of reports to come through, so we only received them on a Monday morning, so there is a slight delay in that data coming through to us before we're able to see how many were non-compliant for not submitting that data through the portal. The last thing I'd like to highlight is the gravel monitoring, which I've spoken about on page 85. So a little over a year ago, the resource management team picked up the monitoring of the consents from the catchment operations team. That allowed the catchment operations to focus on river management while we monitored the consents. We've kept the monitoring program exactly the same in the quarterly section, so that hasn't changed for the customer. But you may note on the graphs on the following page, we do have a small, a number of consents that are non-compliant for not submitting the records of extraction, which means in turn they haven't paid for the gravel that they've extracted. So we have approximately between 34 and 69% of the consents which we monitored during that period which haven't paid in varying forms. So it's quite a significant number. And we also just then don't have a handle on the resource use either. Happy to take any questions.
Jeremy.
Just in regards to high water takes, and see you've got lines of telemetry. Are all, I take it we'll get to the point where most are, but any consents in the Tara Conservation Order, everyone, that all those consents they'll have to have electronic, I take it, systems that we get to know through.
Telemetry system.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Just is that encrypted though, so we can monitor all those, because it was data in the past, it was a bit patchy and things, but I take it we're left into the bar that we'll know exactly how much all those water takes are coming on a daily basis, accumulated and through the alarmist. Do they break?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So there is requirements under the environmental standards for volume per second when they do and don't have to become telemated. However, the bulk of people who don't have to be telemated are considering telemetry now because it makes life on the farm easier for reporting, and it means they don't have to fill in that form at the end of the year. So there is actually a natural change which is happening for ease of reporting. It also means that other suppliers and things can get that data as well.
So just to be clarified, with the new water and land plan, we can go up to 87,000 litres, this will be about 86 something, as a permitted activity. So you don't have to report what your usage is, but you're working on theory of people that are working to that limit. I'm just saying that you've got a water tank, you still have to send data on how much water you're going in, but it's permitted. But if it's permitted activity, you just say, I'm not using that much. I don't have to give you the data.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So
I'm just trying to clarify.
So a number of those consents that are under that 86,000 litres are currently voluntarily telemetering the data.
Yeah.
So if they're sending that data, we will continue to take that, and the science team do use that in the allocation tables and things.
We're trying one of those now because we've fallen into that. But I'm just saying that if you went for a permitted activity, we're only going to use 80,000 litres. They don't actually have to record the usage to show that they're working in a permitted activity. Is it?
It would be advantageous to record it.
I'm not asking that, but I'm just saying by law they don't have
You
to.
don't, but it would be.
You're saying, hey, we're only using 80,000 litres and there's a trust thing on that. I'm not saying they're purposely dodging, but it's just around water takes and things. I know it's a very simple system to have in place, and it's really quite good for the on-farm management too. But it's just more around the legal requirements. I'm just trying to understand with the new level of permitted activities.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So with permitted activities, we would treat it the same as we do for anything else. If we called out it's an alleged breach, we would investigate that, and we would be looking for some form of evidence, one way or another, whether or not they did meet that permitted activity threshold at that time. Hence the statement, it could be advantageous to keep some records.
Yeah, it'd be pretty hard to prove. That's what I'm just trying to say that from the farm. So I don't know what I've just wanted the clarification there.
Yeah, because a permitted activity is not a resource consent, then the conditions that we put on a resource consent requiring the ongoing provision of information. We haven't got the same scope to do that, so I guess there's a potential loss of information there. But as Donna says, hopefully most people would see some value in recording that information.
Oh, absolutely, it is. It's good talk to have.
Stephen Hall.
My question was on the same issue, and it appears you have some legacy issues of people non-supplying year after year, and I'm just wondering if you could, in those cases, you actually say you need to go to telemetry rather than just encouraging it. Some are moving, but the people that aren't, if it's ongoing, that probably should be something we're actually doing, because cumulatively these are still quite large takes. And just on Jeremy's, might be a permitted activity, but if you can't prove that you've been under the thing, your supply could be at risk. So there's education's obviously the first port of call, but when you add all those up, and if there's no recourse, especially if you're in an area where it's quite short, it's not helpful for us for allocation either.
Thank you. The stockpiling of gravel, is that the same operators in any case?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we do have a few frequent flyers in the term and stockpiling of gravel, but we have seen an improvement in that as well. There's also a few small operators where it's a short-term stockpile and it might be there for a couple of months and then it moves on, versus large significant stockpiling, which is then used for commercial gain. So stockpiling is quite a broad term.
Okay. Can I ask, with the significant non-compliance and the dairy inspections, whether there have been any prosecutions?
Not currently.
Thank you.
Chairman, just regarding that top two, it says officers regarding dairy grazing, winter grazing, officers experience a higher than normal level of frustration towards staff in regards to winter grazing. Have you got your head around why that is the case? Is it a particular time of year when things were really wet, or the season, or is it just an observation?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we have noticed that the last two winters we've experienced an increase in agitated behaviour with the customers we're working with. This year's been compounded with prices going down and economic issues around rule changes. So there's been a lot happening in that space. And then winter on top of that just can be a catalyst at times.
So if we can find a way to provide some type of certainty, like my earlier question towards this committee around those pathways for people, that might help. Maybe.
Thank you. Any further questions or commentary about the resource management team report? If not, get somebody to put the recommendation, which is to receive the report. Thank you, Chairman Hull. Seconded by Councillor Rodway. Thank you. There's no further discussion. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? Carried. Thank you. Next item is the regulatory work program. On again.
I will take the report as read with just two highlights. So the operational regulatory framework, you've received an update this meeting from Bruce, which was on target, and the annual compliance monitoring and enforcement priorities. So 10 priorities is the next paper. So that will keep that one on target as well for timeframes.
Thank you. Is there any questions or commentary regarding that regulatory work program report?
Just a quick one. Just in regards, Bruce said his team's fully.
Consents team.
Consents team is your team fully up to
Mr. Chair, I currently have
people
one
parent?
vacancy.
one vacancy? No, it's just had if you've got the full crew on. Good.
It's good.
Mr. Chairman, that vacancy which Tom talked about was is moving through the process. So the intention is to fill that vacancy as well. But the chief executive needs to approve the recruitment process.
Okay, so the recommendation is that the regulatory be resolved to receive that report. Thank you, Jeremy. Seconded by Peter. No further commentary or questions? Put the motion. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? It's carried. Mataura Water Conservation Report, is that correct? Yes.
9.7.
9.7 compliance priorities.
I thought it might have missed something. 2 pages stuck together. Here we go. Compliance priorities for 24-25. Donna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So recently we have workshopped with a number of councillors the compliance priorities which we had for 2023-2024 and looked at the data that we've had on file about whether or not we're prioritising our resourcing in the right area. That data showed that if we keep the priorities the same, we will be targeting the right areas for where we're seeing the most number of breaches and non-compliances. So that proposes that the annual priorities for 2024-2025 in no particular order are the continuation of monitoring regionally significant areas, reducing discharges to water to improve water quality, responding to incidents and calls for service, monitoring water quantity, reducing impacts on coastal areas, and reducing discharges to air.
Right, so we discussed this, Morris.
Just the discharges to air, I note that it says within the indicator of Gore air sheds, but there is, we've talked about this lots of times before, it's quite an issue in the peri-urban areas as well. You do respond to those. People ring up and say, you know, somebody's next door is doing the washing sort of thing. You respond to them, won't you?
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. So we respond to all of those. So discharge to air or burning incident is a high priority incident. So we do those within 1 to 24 hours when we receive that call. The noting for the air sheds is because of the no burn season. So that becomes an extra high priority for us to respond to.
Thank you.
The discharges to air for those 2 places you mentioned, the only places we actually measure it.
Yeah, I know. There's an emphasis on
so that we can have a definitive measurement of what actually is happening.
Yeah, but it can still affect people's health and their quality of life outside of those issues.
Well, I appreciate that, but if we're going to have something concrete, then we have to have measurements at some stage, and those are the only 2 places that we have those.
Yeah, no, well, that's right, but this is a compliance thing.
Chairman Hall?
Donna, do you want at this stage to talk about the procedure where we might go and look at a winter grazing paddock and say there's no environmental issues? Was the question came from, I think it was Peter asking, do we have a process in place to hand over if it's an animal welfare issue to MPI, and is there a structured process you have to do that?
Through you, Mr. Yes, there is a structured process. Would you like me to briefly take you through that?
Yeah.
So if we receive a winter grazing call and we attend to the site, whether or not we determine there's an RMA issue, if we believe there is a potential for an animal welfare concern, the officer takes a photo or a small video, just enough for their records for them to be able to show their team leader or myself. We do basically what we call a soundboarding session, which is the same process for if there's a non-compliance on a consent and an officer wants to soundboard how to grade that consent, just to work through whether or not there is the potential there is an animal welfare issue there, because we are not the subject matter experts. We want to make sure we're sending through the right referrals to the right people at the right time. If it's determined a referral is to go through, we contact the 0800 number for animal welfare, which everyone else uses, and I just advise of the potential issue. Local on the field staff will give us a call if they get that referral through and they decide they need to follow that up, and at which stage we might show them that photo to say this is what we saw, and at that stage they might be able to say no, that's actually just standard deconditioning or whatever the matter is, and then they know which avenue they're using, whether it's advice and education or they're actually attending the site. So there is a structured way that we respond and follow all those up. We do a recalibration training with MPI every couple of years, and we're due to have that again at the end of this season, which is timely with having a reasonably new team for me.
No, thanks for that.
Just to further on with that, so it's that point of taking a photograph, isn't it, by that officer that warrants any further type of action. But that recalibrating, you just finished off talking about that, that will give guidance for that officer to either take that photograph or not. Yeah, so that's the key point, isn't it?
Yeah. And often, so the team leader or myself won't be in the field, so that photo is really easy. If we don't have that, we could make the wrong call. So it is simply so the officer has something to refer back to when they're talking to us internally to make sure they're making the right decisions.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Councillor Guyton.
Yeah, it's very good to know that you're across that so well. I wished I had known that when I was speaking with this journalist from the New Zealand Listener, because that was the focus, one of the focuses of the questions. I just wonder how that information, that process could be more widely known or accessible or advertised, because there are a number of people in the community who equate those things, or it's not quite the right word, what's the word? Conflate, yeah. Yeah, so I wonder if that's worth doing, or not as a disclaimer, but just simply, here's where we sit.
Yeah.
And we have got a very sounding process. Yeah. It's just a question.
Yeah, that picture in people's minds straight away, Environment Southland.
Yeah.
Perception is reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, we can't go around sort of
I
denying.
know, but
We have, as we said earlier on, that if it's MPI's responsibility and it has been referred to them for action and they paid several visits to that farm, as I understand it, then we need to refrain from comment or make comment very carefully, even though people may imagine that it's our problem.
So we do have a good working relationship with the local MPI animal welfare and NAIT teams. They are part of our stakeholder conversations when we meet weekly during the winter period. So we're live to what's happening for each other and where we can actually work together, which is quite good. Conscious that we both don't have endless streams of resource, so where we can, we kind of work together as much as possible.
Perhaps MPI could actually make it plain at some stage, particularly in that incident, that this was referred to us, but it's not, we're not involving Environment Southland. Where's that effect? Whether anybody's listening. Anyway, So that's 9.7, the compliance priorities. Do we have?
Move the recommendations, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Hall. Seconded by Chairman, Councillor McDonald. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Thanks, Donna. Now we're on to the Matera Water Conservation Order update on August.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I see that Bianca and Dawn are online, so welcome to them. Just a bit of preamble for this report. Obviously, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the meeting, and over a process of the last couple of years, there's been a very concerted effort put into seeking to recalibrate the consents above GORE into be consistent with the Matera Water Conservation Order, which is a statutory instrument. And there's been a massive amount of really good work done by Don, Bianca and Lacey in particular. I take pretty much zero credit, but they've done some awesome work in terms of working with the consent holders and trying to get a collaborative reallocation that everybody is happy with or comfortable with, rather than what could potentially be a much more litigious thing that could drag on for many, many more years. So I'll hand over to Bianca and Don from there.
Hi, good afternoon. Can I take it that the report is as read and we can just take questions, or would you like some commentary on it?
Some commentary might be useful, Don. I know that you and Bianca have both been involved in this for some time.
I'll leave that over to Bianca if she's around. I presume she is.
Yes, I am around. Good afternoon, everyone. We pretty much, well, we have verbal agreements for sufficient reductions, and all bar 2 consent holders have signed on the dotted line to indicate agreement or amendments to consent conditions to resolve the over-allocation. The 2 that we've got remaining, one is meeting with their farm consultant this week. There's been delays there due to calving, various other things. Life is continuing, I think, around this issue that we're trying to put pressure on them for. And the other one we'll be meeting with this week to secure those reductions. So we're quietly confident that we're there, I think, is the message. And as I say, all but 2 of the consent holders have signed a piece of paper to agree to reductions and amendments to their consent conditions, which is fantastic.
So I think that's a significant outcome to the work that you've done, a significant positive outcome to the work you've done, rather than having to go through a whole lot of legal and rule processes.
I mean, I think there has been an awful lot of goodwill from the consent holders, and really want to acknowledge how good they have been to work with. And I mean, it's taken a while for them to come around and be able to have those constructive conversations with them, but once we got to that point, we've made significant progress. And also the consent holder steering group, independently chaired by Bernadette Hunt, have been very helpful as well, particularly in trying to secure the last reductions that we've needed.
Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, just a question. It may seem obvious to the committee, but maybe not to me. The reductions that we're talking about are paper reductions, not material reductions to water. Is that correct or not correct?
It's a mix. In most instances, the consent holders haven't been using the water that's been allocated to them. So they've been using, say if they've been using around 60% of what's been allocated, they may have agreed to give up, say, around 30% to leave them a slight buffer. In some other instances, the impact has been more material. A couple of consent holders have put new bores in to obtain water from a lower connection. So that has been, it's required a considerable investment. For some of them, they are changing the way that they use water, so taking more water from lower connection bores to be able to reduce the amount that they're taking from higher connection bores, which is going to increase their pumping costs. So it's a mix.
Yep. Thank you.
Yes, Jeremy.
Yeah, just wondering, obviously iwi and Fish and Game, they've been keeping discussions, but you don't see any any issues there? Everybody's sort of been kept informed and
Yeah, we've been engaging with them regularly. Fish and Game have indicated that as long as we get it over the line, they're happy, and we'll flick them a letter once we've got the final sign-offs, and they won't be considering themselves affected parties to any of the reviews. Iwi, similar for the reviews. They're happy as long as the water conservation order allocations are achieved.
good.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, just to talk a little bit further, and Bianca might fill in some gaps here, but obviously there's almost agreement in principle for the reallocation regime, which would then transpire through to the formalisation of that and a suite of new consents. Review notices have been issued to all the existing consent holders, and the hope is that once those final elements have been sorted, the couple that Bianca spoke about, then that could then work its way through to a new suite of consents issued sort of in block that then basically formalises the agreement in principle. Is that pretty much how you see it playing out, Bianca?
Yeah, that's correct. A number of them do have replacement consents in process, given that this has taken some time to resolve. So those ones, in some instances, are still outstanding information around water quality or other aspects that are unrelated to the allocation issues that we're dealing with here. So they might not all be decided in one block. The reviews, we're certainly anticipating that they will be, but those replacement applications may kind of be decided over the next wee while.
Chairman Horrell.
Well, I think Bruce has answered half my question, and that was really along the lines that we've just appointed the commissioner, who obviously will go through the process of renewing these consents. People have signed, most of them have signed up that they are happy to do so, but there's still a formal process to go through, and a number of them have lapsed or be on hold to actually get them all together, I'm assuming. So it's been a bit of a long road, but it appears quite a festering problem is going to be resolved with everybody happy or mutually unhappy.
I think they're mostly happy, actually, because Bianca and the team and others have done a really good job of, I guess, coming up with specific solutions for individual consent holders, none of which look the same as anybody else's. So it's been a useful process of two things, actually, of finding those solutions, but also quite a number of consent holders becoming far better educated about their operation and their responsibilities and how they can best manage their resource.
Yeah, I find it quite fascinating, and I hope it would have been good for you to have a social scientist sitting along beside you in the team, because a lot of the future discussions will be around these processes of how to share a finite resource out amongst people, and for people to voluntarily come to the table and accept less of that resource. How the hell did you get that done? So we need to, if there's some real key learnings we could take away from this process and transfer them into, say, a plan change into the future, that would be of enormous value, one would think.
Yeah, I think it would need to be done through ES management, but I have drafted something out, and Bianca and I could have a look at it around the sorts of things that we think it takes to effectively make this work. And every case is different, and every consent holder is different. And I guess that's the starting point, really, except that there's no one size fits all and no one operation that's exactly the same as the others. But people are quite good at, given the chance, at looking at their operation and seeing what they could do that would make a difference, and minimise the impact on their business. But they need help to do that. And the first challenge actually is to building a level of trust between the parties. between the consent holders, but between the consent holders and the council as well.
Thank you.
Yes, Morris.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, it was a really good job. I wonder, and you might probably explained this earlier when I wasn't here, about how the situation came about. I understand it's a miscalculation of the stream depletion formulas for different aquifers, depending on how close they are to the river and all of that. But did it come about as a result of mistakes by the council hydrologists or by the companies or the irrigation people's hydrologist, or was it a mix of two, or was there some other reason?
Do you want to have a shot at that, Bianca?
Yeah, I can have a shot at that. There were a number of, I suppose there were a number of reasons. Partly it was due to, well, partly miscalculation, but partly just the allocation not being kept up to date. But it was also in part due to changes to the regional plan, which meant that things were being calculated differently as well. That played a part as well. So it's reasonably complex. It did come from the council, but there were some things that were, I suppose, more within the council's control than others.
Are there any costs likely to come on the council other than, obviously the whole process, like compensation from irrigators, for example?
We're hoping not. Some of them have made those types of, dare I say it, threats along the way, but I think we're in a situation now where they're all sort of grudgingly happy with where it's ended up. So I wouldn't anticipate that there wouldn't necessarily rule it out, but I think it would be highly unlikely.
Yeah, it's not something that's been any coverage of in recent times. In the early stages, there was a fair bit of grumpiness around it all, but that sort of died away. And as Bianca said, some consent holders have made some fairly big investments in reducing their impact on the river, with putting in bores and various other things that they've done. And they certainly haven't been among the ones that have been going, so what's the council going to front up with? They have had the benefit of quite a lot of hydrological work that's been done that they are now have full access to in terms of supporting any replacement consents and knowledge around the. So they haven't been without benefit, although they may not have seen it quite as clearly as that at times.
Thank you.
Jeremy?
Yeah, it has cost us a lot of money, but that's in due course, not taking us to court. But the reality is, and the council needs to learn, we got caught with our pants down in regards to data, understanding consents, monitoring consents, even knowing where bores are. There was some big holes there, and the main thing for us is we've got to learn some serious that we've fixed those issues, and these things don't happen again. I mean, that's the big point for us, is to make sure we've got everything, the I's dotted and T's crossed, and that's even when I'm talking about water, the water metering systems and things in place. It's just we need to have those things in place to say we've got the data, we know what's going on, but hopefully we can put a peg in the sand and move on and don't look back, learn from a few things and look forward. So I think it's been overall, it's been a great outcome. I was on once it gets all signed up, of course.
Can I just add?
You've got to move forward and deal with the next thing that comes along.
Can I just add to that too? Thank you very much. And I know Don, at those initial stages, things don't get done when you've got a really hard task in front of you. You're thinking about how are we going to do this? How do we start it? But it's having the confidence that you two had to make a start on it without seeing the end. And yeah, not that easy, is it? But well done.
Yes, on behalf of council, thank you for the really good work that you've done, because you realised our intention to have this resolved by agreement rather than legislation or improving the rules, and you've done it very successfully, so compliments to both of you.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, just add to that. it's a massive effort and huge effort from Don and Bianca to get to this stage, and Lacey's also been closely involved, as has Steve West and the consents team. We'll probably keep a pretty low profile on this until such time as things have moved their way through to formalisation of the new regime. At that point, it probably certainly is something worth celebrating a bit more publicly if we can get to that point, but for obvious reasons, there's still some remaining sensitivity, so probably still remain reasonably low profile and just working with those individual parties and hopefully get that sorted. Certainly pick up on Councillor McPhail's point, some of this data that we rely on for decision making around water allocation tables and things is like fundamental building block data for our organisation, and it's pretty much got to be right. And we certainly need to take the learnings out of this scenario and make sure we're not building another MWCO somewhere else that takes a whole lot of time, money, and effort, and quite a bit of goodwill to extract ourselves from some stage in the future.
Well, there was no instant decision from council that created this. It was over a period of time with a whole lot of small decisions. So, thank you again for taking part in our meeting today. The recommendation is that we receive the report. I'll move that from the chair, seconded by Jeremy. Any further discussion or questions? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. The last item on the agenda was public excluded business. There is none. So I declare that the meeting is concluded, and I thank you for your attendance and your input. Very good.